Hi JoshGeners, this is Robin Scott. For those who don't remember me, I'm a clinical psychologist and we've been in JoshGen up until very recently when my wife and I moved to East London to join New Life Church in East London. And I've been asked to make this video for those who are working with and helping couples in difficult circumstances, in just giving some tips as to how to work with those people and how to make it easier for those people. So there's so much I can say about that. I do a lot of couples therapy. This is the area I've chosen to kind of specialize in since becoming a psychologist. And so there's loads I could say, but I'm going to try and give you some things from my experience as a marriage therapist. And I don't have the time to give a disclaimer for every point I'm going to say, so I just pray that you'd forgive the scarcity of theory at times, and that you would know that there's probably a lot more to substantiate the things I do want to say. But yeah, I'll jump straight into it. And I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 principles that I think would be useful for you when dealing with couples that are in a lot of distress. The first thing that I want to say is that one of the main principles I use when working with couples is that it is never about the content. So if you've got a couple in distress and they're fighting about certain things, don't get sucked into the details of what they're fighting about. Certainly don't try and get sucked into the who's right and who's wrong and whose version of the story is correct. We'll spend a lot of time doing that. But I've learned that underneath the fight about the content is always a question around the security of the relationship. So when couples are stuck in fights cyclically for a very long time, it's the security of the bond. How safe is my relationship? That's the question that's going on underneath that. And that's always what they're fighting about. Where the other partner is starting to feel like a threat to the bond. And our job in counseling people is to try and figure out how all of this content relates to that very key piece of information. In psychological theory, we have something called attachment theory. And attachment theory talks about attachment needs. And we see that attachment needs underlie adult romantic relationships almost universally, across cultures and across time. And the word attachment refers to an innate human drive for secure emotional connection with another person. And we see that across the world, establishing a secure connection like this is the primary driver and life force of people. It seems to outplay even the drive to secure basic needs, to secure financial security. Establishing this seems to be the number one thing that people want to do across all, like I said, all different cultures, all different social classes. And what happens is if we are able to establish that kind of a relationship, it becomes our brain's primary way of dealing with stress. So what happens is that when we experience a stressor in the real world, the first thing our brains do when we experience that stressor is look around for our attachment figure, look around for our ally. And when we're able to find our ally, that moment soothes our brain, it soothes our fight or flight response, and it causes us to think adaptively and creatively about the problem automatically. When we are unable to find that relationship, we start to trigger a new fight or flight response about the fact that relationship isn't there. And so then we end up with a double crisis. And often couples who are in a lot of distress permanently involve two people who are experiencing this double crisis all the time, as they over and over again have the experience that their partner is not available for them. When we are able to establish that attachment, it gives us a sense of two things. I'm summarizing really briefly, but these are things that have been established in research with hundreds of thousands of people. And it gives us two things. So one is a secure base. So it gives us a place that we feel almost as our fortress, and that as we go out into the world, we know that we've got an ally on our side. We're operating from a secure place. And and the more secure we feel in these relationships, actually the more, it might sound counterintuitive, but the more independently functioning we become in our lives, the more creative and the more adaptive we become. The other thing it gives us is a safe haven, which is just that place to go and breathe and kind of be yourself. And the place that doesn't have to be distressing. And again, couples where they don't feel this, it's not only distressing because they can't find their partner, but it's also the whole of life becomes distressing because they don't have that secure base from which to operate. So it really becomes a preoccupation of the mind when we can't find these things, because it's linked into a wired-in survival mechanism and a wired-in way of dealing and coping with stress. And so, like I said, when people start fight, or when they have been stuck in long-term discord, it's when they are not able to find that thing, and they're protesting the fact that they can't find that security that would give them that haven. And that's actually what's going on underneath everything they're fighting about. And I just want to say that even people who are being very rational and who claim that the argument they're making is purely rationality, experience has taught me, even those partners, even that half of the relationship is just going, I'm just being rational and I just wish this person could kind of get on the same page. I don't feel anything, I'm not having any emotions. That's not true. That's actually just their way of expressing that same thing. Often those people don't have a good emotional vocabulary. And the only way they know of expressing their emotions is through thought and logic. But we've got to look underneath that and see that that's not the case, even though that would be their own subjective experience of that. What's the second principle I want to give you? The first principle was it's never about the content, it's always about the relationship. The second principle I want to give you is that underneath the very hostile and uncooperative emotions that people might be expressing during these kind of really long-term marital conflicts are always vulnerable and unexpressed attachment-related feelings. So what happens is when our attachment security is threatened, it triggers a fight or flight response in our midbrain. And when we feel secure in our relationship, that security soothes that fight or flight response, and we can just have a rational conversation with our partner. When we don't feel secure, there is no midbrain soothe, and the person starts enacting that fight or flight response. And underneath a fight or flight response is big fighting emotion, or cutting the other person out, being cruel, being harsh, shutting them down, withdrawing into a rigid position. So these are the things that people can do. And often the emotion on the surface is a lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of hostility, or maybe it's passive aggressive, maybe it's just cold rationality. But underneath all of that are the vulnerable feelings that are underneath the fight or flight response, right? So if you think of a fight or flight response, the trigger for that is danger. I see something, it's dangerous, right? And the person will then not express the fear that's underneath that. So instead of going like, whoa, what you just did there, that feels like you're not available, that's scary for me. Or, whoa, it looks like you're more interested in that person than in me, that's scary for me. Or, whoa, do you care more about your job than about me, that's scary for me. Instead of expressing those fears, which are the more vulnerable feelings underneath that, what they'll do is they'll express anger. So why are you 5 minutes late again? Instead of, wow, I'm feeling insecure again today because once again it feels like it wasn't important enough for you to get home to me. So they'll go for that less vulnerable feeling. But underneath it are these vulnerable feelings, and one of the thing about those feelings is those feelings don't just go away with us trying to logic them away. They actually stay firing until there's a resolution. So until that attachment security is re-established, those feelings fire. It's almost like there's a fire alarm going off, and you can tell that fire alarm to keep quiet, but while there's still smoke in that room, it's just going to keep going off. And these feelings are similar. And one of the things I've seen in issues in churches giving counsel to these long-term marital conflicts is the church's strategy is often to try and shut down those feelings. So you need to just think differently, you need to not do this. But they often give practical advice, so they get sucked into the content. They're like, no, this person's side of the argument is rational, you need to submit to that and go with that. Or they kind of give that kind of advice, but actually that kind of closes down the argument, but the person who's activated, their feelings remain because that smoke signal is still going off. They just don't have the practical content anymore to raise the alarm on that, but it bubbles away underneath, and in fact it gets worse. It kind of just starts to build, right, because they don't have a way of expressing that. So we need to help people towards those more vulnerable feelings rather than trying to shut those down. What are those more vulnerable feelings? Well, here's a hint for you. It's often fear of rejection. So I'm being rejected, or this person is losing interest in me. This person heart seems to be going astray. Or there's something, alternatively, there's other than rejection, there's often this sense of inadequacy. So I'm never going to be good enough for you. You're never happy with me, and I just need to shut you down. So that feeling of inadequacy, that fear of never being good enough. If you raise a problem, I'm going to shut you down and tell you you're too demanding, because I actually struggle to believe that I will actually be able to meet your needs, right? So instead of talking about my struggle, they shut the other person down. The other feeling that could be underneath that is shame. So, wow, I really know that I blew it, and I don't want to admit that, and I'm scared of you seeing that, so I'm going to kind of tell you that you need to change your attitude, so I don't have to face what I've done. You have to be more forgiving so that I don't have to face the feelings that I feel about what I've done, right? So those feelings, that rejection, those inadequacy, shame, those are often the darker places underneath that drive the moves that people make. Often people don't express these vulnerable feelings because they don't think it's safe, right? So I can't tell you I feel ashamed of what I've done, because maybe you'll just use that as ammunition. Or I can't tell you that I'm feeling rejected because you're just going to say I'm too demanding and I need to get over it. So I hide these vulnerable feelings, but then I try and find other ways of protesting that same thing. And then everyone gets stuck in the content of that protest, right? And the normal interventions that most couples would use don't work because the people aren't feeling that relational security. So another mistake I see in churches is they try to give advice that would work in normal couples in building a relationship. Couples that have that relationship security, like, oh, have you got on this many dates? Or they try and throw in stuff like that. But when there's relationship security, those kind of interventions do nothing, right? It's just kind of like throwing a smoke screen over what's going on, and it's really that deeper security that needs to be addressed there. So the third principle I want to give you is about the bad behavior that people have, and the principle is this: that people's bad behavior, the bad things that they're doing, you've got to realize that no matter how destructive that seems to you, that this is this person's best way that they know of trying to get the relationship security they seek. So a lot of, again, in church contexts, a lot of people try and shut down that bad behavior. You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, you need to stop doing this. You need to just submit, so you need to stop saying all these things. So they try and shut down the behavior, but they don't actually ever address the relationship security or give the person alternative skills or ways of establishing that security. So the person then just goes quiet, and again that thing just grows and grows, right? So we want to shut that bad behavior down because the bad behavior makes it worse, right? So we can see, I want to give a classic cliched Christian couple if I can, but it just hopefully makes the point. You're sitting with a wife and a husband, and the wife kind of goes, "You're just not leading our relationship." She'll kind of throw that out there, and he goes, "Well, you just don't have a good enough relationship with Jesus, so you expect too much of me," right? So what's happening is she's feeling rejected, and the way she has of expressing that is to say, "You're not a good leader. Like, if you just become a better leader, then I'll feel safer." But she's struggling to say, like, "I need more security in this relationship." And he's struggling, he's feeling, "I'll never be good enough for you. I feel inadequate. I don't have relationship skills. I don't know how to give you what you need." And so what he says to her is that her needs are too much. She needs to go get them met somewhere else. So it makes it sound like it's her problem, right? But the more he says that, the more she feels like he doesn't care, and the more she complains, the more he feels like he's not good enough, right? So the behavior that they're doing, the theology that they're throwing at each other, is actually making the other partner feel even worse and increasing the likelihood that they'll do their bad behavior and then make them feel worse, right? So we've got to help them find alternative moves. And again, often the church, what they do here is they try and switch off that relational need. So if you just had a better relationship with Jesus, you wouldn't be needing this thing. And that's, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that's the equivalent of saying if you had a better relationship with Jesus, you wouldn't be affected by the fact that your husband is having an affair, right? If I say that, you'd say, "Hey, that sounds ridiculous." But actually all of these things are growing to that point. All of these things are the person monitoring the security of their relationship and trying to, and that alarm is going off and they're trying to respond, and we're saying, "Hey, turn off that alarm by focusing on Jesus." And that doesn't help the person again, because they might love Jesus, but there's still an alarm wired in that's going, "No, no, no, I've got a problem here, there's danger," and they're seeing that danger, whether or not they have a relationship with Jesus, right? So we need to, instead of trying to teach them to switch off that alarm system, we need to teach them how to use that alarm system differently. And this is the fourth principle. Accessing more vulnerable emotions and being able to express those is the key to turning off that alarm system. So for example, in that case where that husband was going, "You just need to have a better relationship with Jesus," he was saying that to his wife. An example of him expressing his more vulnerable emotion would be, "Hey, I really struggle because I don't feel what it takes to meet, I don't feel like I have what it takes to meet your needs. And it makes me so scared that I'm never going to be good enough for you, and you're always going to be complaining about me, and that's really scary for me." So if he can start to express that, then that's going to be the thing that starts to turn the relationship around and start a brand new conversation where she can actually hear that she means so much to him that it's agonizing for him that he can't meet her needs, right? She could be going like, "Hey, I get really worried that this relationship doesn't mean anything to you when I see you putting in so little effort. And that makes me wonder if you're going to lose interest in me, or if I'm just going to disappear into the background where you get caught up into all these other things." And you can be like, "Oh wow, you need to know that you're important to me, right? Okay, how can I get that to you?" So it's the way to start having a new conversation. The thing is that people struggle to have these conversations because they feel vulnerable and they're convinced the other partner isn't going to respond to them. So they're convinced that their partner's going to say, "You're too needy," etc. And they need someone who's safe, someone in between who's safe, who understands what's going on, and who can be a mediator, who can understand both of them and can help them hear that conversation over a long period of time. and who can make it safer for them to start saying the harder things to each other, and who'll mediate in those cases. And that would most often be you. But then the fifth principle I want to say is don't be afraid to admit that you need help sometimes, right? And I want to say that that's okay. There's very little in even formal theological training that helps people navigate the complexities of real marriage distress. That a lot of pastors haven't been trained to this, but they've been trained to think that they should have the solution to all these problems, but actually many of them don't. And it's naive to think that you should know the solution to all those problems, right? So be able to admit to those people when you are limited and you need to get help, and there are people out there that can help you. And there are Christian people out there who can help you navigate these things with couples. And I don't want to undermine the amazing thing that the Bible is, but and I'm sure you'll all agree that the Bible was intended to be a revelation of Jesus. It wasn't meant to be a comprehensive dissertation on how to resolve marital problems, just like it wasn't a comprehensive dissertation on a lot of other issues in our lives. So as much as there's a lot of beautiful stuff about marriage in there, it's not everything we need, and we can use science, we can use what we've learned to guide us through these things, and you should be able to access those resources as well as someone who's leading that situation. And you don't need to apologize for the fact that you don't know all of that innately. So that's where I want to leave you today. I hope that that's been helpful, and if you need to get hold of me, I'm sure there'll be some kind of information of how to contact me. And yeah, I hope you all continue to go well as we navigate forward for the next few months. Cheers, guys.